Welcome back to another episode of Off the Ruck, your weekly rugby breakdown. I'm your host, John Ferguson, and with me co-host Finn Morton. Finn, mate, you had a bit of travelling over the weekend. We'll get to that in a sec, but how you doing?
Good, mate. Good to be back for another week. Was another big weekend of rugby, like we forecast last week. Big weekend of results and what that could mean for the future of Super Rugby this season. And excited to give anyone watching the rundown and our thoughts on the games, mate. But Wallaroos as well, great result. But yeah, plenty to touch on.
Yep, so we've got the inaugural Super Rugby Pacific Player of the Year winner to go through. We've got the Wallaroos, we've got the round that just was in Super Rugby Pacific. And obviously, we're going to keep a close eye on what's happening in Wallabies prospects because the Lions tour is almost upon us and it is looming. Last thing I'll just say before we get into the pod proper is that the subscription numbers going up. Thank you guys so much. And again, anything that you guys can do to help us is really to hit that subscription button because that is the way that we can drive the way that we bring you guys content as rugby lovers. So without further ado, Finn, let's just get into it.
Let's do it.
And of course, we'll start with a Super Rugby Pacific roundup of the round that just went, and it was a pretty interesting round. It gave a lot of results which actually have a lot of weight on the table, and it might not have come where you guys have thought for. But so we were going to start chronologically, but I think we have to start with Saturday afternoon in North Harbour Stadium. Moana Pasifika beating their '09 rivals and now the Kings of '09. And I have seen some great banter from the Moana Pasifika media team online against the Blue Hoskins' Tutus from the Blues. But Finn, this shakes up the top six. Let's just start with that. Wow, what a win from the Moana Pasifika team.
Mate, Moana, everyone's second team, I think, this season. I've probably said that before as well. They look like they have so much fun. If you look at their social media, and I don't think anyone, except if you're a Blues fan, I don't think anyone was saddened to see this result or didn't want to see it go that way. There's a little known player who's an exciting up and coming prospect playing open side flanker for Moana this season. Ardie Savea, I think he's going to be an All Black very, very soon. Mate, he continues to honestly set the standard, doesn't he? When he signed for Moana last year, Sir John Kerwin, other people, other pundits, fans were critical of that move and were unsure about what that could mean for Ardie going into the All Blacks environment in 2025. But man, he is better now than he was last year. He is better now than he was in 2023 when he won World Rugby Player of the Year. The shackles are off. He's playing with freedom. And Moana, Fergo, they're reaping the rewards.
Yeah, I mean, with a rising tide, all boats rise. I think that I botched that saying, but I think that you get what I'm saying there. It's amazing what he's obviously brought to the group from a spiritual aspect to be able to embrace who they are, but also from a leadership and standard point of view from being a professional All Black for so many years. And it's just amazing how much he has been able to inspire the team, but also what an amazing job Tana Umanga is doing there with his coaching staff to be able to get the whole squad because they do look a lot more connected and they do look like they have a much broader and better understanding of their plan. But it doesn't hurt to have a good game driver in the Aussie, Patrick Pellegrini, who actually plays for Tonga internationally, but nonetheless, he did grow up here and he has played a lot of shoot shield. But don't you think it's so impressive that they have such a good halves pairing that I don't think it's spoken enough about?
Yeah, well, Pellegrini only just came back into the team at first five in the number 10 jersey. He had come off the bench, I think, for at least two games in a row. So for me, when the team was announced, that was the big story of the week. Going to a Blues game, Battle of the '09, having someone of his caliber in that 10 jump is huge because he's been great this season. A breakout star. And that's quite a bizarre thing to say considering, like you said, Fergo, he's played for Tonga. He's gone to a Rugby World Cup. He was there in 2023. But honestly, he's just gone from strength to strength this season. And I think, outside of the halves, let's think bigger here, Fergo. We can focus on Ardie, and I think a lot of people do focus on Ardie and go, he's the secret to their success. No, it's not only Ardie. He's a massive part in that, don't get me wrong. It's not the halves either. But again, once again, they're a massive part in that. It's a team collective here. The whole team as a whole, they are a lot better than they were last year. 6 wins so far in 2025, maybe more to come. They've got the Chiefs and the Canes coming up, but that's already almost equal their total number of wins from their previous seasons in Super Rugby. So this is a team on the rise, and yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I mean, long may it continue. I want to see them in finals for their first ever finals berth. especially consider that this is the condensed finals format with only 6 teams as opposed to 8 in previous seasons. So that's a hell of a lift and a shift from the team. So I'd like to see that continue. Where that leaves the Blues, we'll get into that when we go into the round preview for next round at the end. But I think it makes for a pretty spicy makeup of that bottom three of the top six. So we'll get into that in a second. But let's go speed through the chronological part of this round wrap up. So Friday night, the Hurricanes survive a very determined and solid Highlanders team. I think what I would say about this is that this kind of feels like a typical Hurricanes performance in the fact that they're clearly a better side than what they played, and they were saved by the skin of their teeth from the quality of someone like Cam Roigard or Ruben Love or someone like that. And it was quite a frustrating game to watch because both sides compounded penalties and errors when they were in their own half. And they had periods of 20 minutes or so throughout the game where they were camped in each other's 22 just based on their own basic errors and ill discipline. What was your quick wrap up of the game?
I mean, you name dropped some superstars there, didn't you, Virgo? You know, Cam Roigard, he obviously scored the winner, so he's going to get a lot of praise and plaudits. But, if you look at that forward pack as well, Braden Yosse unfortunately limped off the field after about 10 minutes, but pretty handy replacement to come on, Duplessis Carriffy, for the Canes, who obviously is in the frame for the All Blacks. But just as a summary, so the Canes winning 24-20. I think the Canes won it as much as the Highlanders lost the game, if that makes sense. The
Yep.
Highlanders,
No, I
when
agree.
Timothy Tavatavanawai secured a turnover with 3 minutes to go on practically the Highlanders' try line, that should have been curtains. That should have been, the Highlanders' first win since the 2015 Super Rugby final in Wellington over the Hurricanes. That should have been that, but not straight at the line out. They gifted the Hurricanes possession with a free kick, a scrum, and they were good enough to make the most of it. It's a win the Canes needed. And again, we'll get into it with the round preview, looking at round 15 coming up, but sets up a mouth-watering contest in Brisbane on Friday night against the Reds.
It truly does. And stay tuned for that later in the pod. We're going to keep this quick. Then we go on to the Friday night. Quick comment on this. I think the main takeaway from the Waratahs game against the Crusaders, which follows that Canes Highlanders game, is just how pissed off Dan McKellar was post game about, he said, systemic, not quote unquote, but systemic upheaval is what he's suggesting with
Uh, it was,
players,
it
with
was,
staff. Yeah.
it was Jake Gordon said that, systemic issues,
Mm,
but McKellar alluded to it. But
yeah.
yeah, it was weird sitting in that room, wasn't it, mate? That press conference room. McKellar, obviously after a loss, he takes it pretty hard, and he wants to win, and he expects success with this Waratahs program. But so does Jake Gordon. And mate, I thought honestly he was really emotional. He almost looked like he was going to cry at some points during that
Mm,
presser. I don't think he genuinely was going to, but he was really hurting, and so was McKellar,
mm.
who came out swinging, like you said, talking about some players are just basically happy to be here, and that's not good enough for the Waratahs anymore.
But what he was on saying, and I don't want to speculate about players and staff, but if you were to pick attack, defense, set piece, where would you say the Waratahs were the worst overall in the game, but also in the season? Because I think that's kind of where we can start looking at.
Oh, it's really hard if you focus on that game against the Crusaders specifically. Again, it was a shellacking during the first half. The Crusaders scored 3 tries in 15 minutes, so it's hard not to look at their defense
Mm,
as an obvious. The set piece also a concern, but at the same time, without Joseph Akusa Suaalii, they didn't really have that X factor in their back line in attack. Darby Lancaster scored a worldie of a try, might have been a knock on during the second half, but aside from that, that team really lacked a bit of punch. So when you compare it to the teams at the top end of the ladder, the likes of the Crusaders, the Chiefs, the Brumbies,
mm.
the Tars, they're lacking in basically all departments.
Yeah, no, we're going to go into stat attack shortly, and we'll have a look just where the Waratahs are struggling. But that's a good way to put it. Across the Pacific to the fortress of Lautoka, it continues to retain its and uphold its reputation. They absolutely pumped the Force, and I said that I tipped the Force just because they needed to. But then the squad, you and I do this on a Monday. The squads don't come out till a Wednesday. If I'd seen that they weren't playing Ben Donalds at 10 from the beginning, I would have made a substantially different prediction. But that's just what we do. That's what we have to live with. But nonetheless, the Force were I watched the game and I was like, where are they losing these points? Because it wasn't clear that the Fijians were dominating them. It was just that every single time the Fijians got down into their half, they scored. Likewise, the Force botched like three or four opportunities when they were almost over the line. So I don't think the scoreline truly reflects of how uneven this or of what the contest was. But nonetheless, it really showed that it was like they just don't have that depth that they need for the top end quality and the polish to be able to close games out or to be able to hold sides out. 'Cause 38 points to 7 is probably one of the biggest margins they've conceded this year.
Yeah, it's been well documented this season, but the travel that the Force have had to do is obviously crazy. How do you fix that? I don't know. They're
Mm,
based in Perth, for crying out loud. Like, they're going to have to do some travel. That said, when Simon Cron announced, when the Western Force announced the team that Simon Cron had picked, and he had opted to rest Hamish Stewart, Nick White, and Harry Potter, that's when I thought, hey, this is a concern. With Carlo Tizzano already out with a pec injury,
mm,
you know, that was a very much weakened Western Force team who mathematically was still in, with a chance of making the playoffs if they won that match.
yep.
Real shame. Real
Yep.
shame. Had to be done to rest your players. That said, the Force have one more game. They host the Tars this week in Perth. Then
Mm,
they're on a bye. So did you really have to rest players? I don't know.
mm,
Maybe it's the one that got away for the Western Force, unfortunately, in
mm.
regards to making the top six.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. I'm not sure the calculations, the maths is working that way for the for the Force nor for the Wallabies resting protocols, if that's indeed what it was. Just a quick comment on Fiji. I think that Ikanivere continues to be very impressive. Isaiah Armstrong Ravula is a 10 that any side would really want in their side to be a budding playmaker when you've got someone who's experienced like Caleb Muntz on the bench. And then you've also got impressive backline players like Longana Musi who could have closed out a few more opportunities and Musi. So really, really like well done to the Fijian draw. We can't take anything away from them, but I just don't think that they were served up a foresight that could have really competed with them. So big shame there. We'll head to the final game of the weekend, and this was a really good game, actually. It's comparatively the Brumbies versus the Reds. I thought that the Brumbies, the way they described it was that they were a bit shell shocked in the first half. I thought it was just a really good contest. I don't necessarily agree with. I wouldn't be as harsh like that on the Brumbies. I just thought it was a good contest, but nonetheless, the Brumbies show that they have a better variation and a better game management strategy than the Reds do. But nonetheless, I actually thought there were green shoots there as far as the Reds go in comparison to previous weeks, how you and I have talked about them. What do you reckon?
I think first and foremost, I'll just say, look, my first time to Canberra, I went down there. It was good fun.
We
The
did allude
biggest
to
home
this. You
crowd.
did head down the highway and you did end up in quite a cold spot known as Canberra.
Yeah, yeah. The media tribunes outside, which I'm a bit precious now, having done this for a few years. I'm pretty used to being nice and warm inside. But no, it was uh, a great game. It was a great game in front of the biggest Brumbies home crowd since 2019 when the Brumbies hosted the Waratahs. So for them to do that 6 year high is pretty unreal. The game lived up to the hype for the most part. I think it was obviously tense during the first term, but the big name players stood up for the Brumbies, and I think that's important. You look at the likes of Andy Muirhead, Tom Wright, captain Alan Alatoa, all scored tries. Of course, Alan, unfortunately, going off the field during the second half, I believe, from memory,
Yeah.
with a lower leg injury. I think the update from Stephen Larkin post game was that it's not as bad as maybe first feared, more of like a cramping situation. Hopefully that's the case because with Joseph Akusasuli out, if Alan Alatoa was out, that's very concerning ahead of the
Mhm.
Lions series. And also the bloke deserves a good run. He missed the World Cup in 2023 with an Achilles injury. If he was ruled out of the Lions series with any other injuries, be that this one or whatever, that would be horrible. You know,
Oh,
we
mate.
like good news in sport, Fergo. We like fairy tales. We like things that we can get excited about and smiled about and, make us cheer. And that wouldn't be that. So, but still, good win for the Brumbies. The Reds almost scored a try of the season contender in the final play, though.
It was
And
looking good, wasn't it? It was a
uh,
proper crack.
they did everything right until the end. I couldn't see who actually knocked the ball on at the end. I don't know if
Mm.
you saw it, Fergo, but they went about 80 meters. And personally, I was pretty keen. I'm in a family tipping comp, and I think I did tip the Reds. No, did tip the
Huge.
Brumbies. and that try would have swung the tipping points in my favour over my uncle. But yet he gets the points, and I'm not happy about that. But it's all good fun with the family.
Hopefully the discourse and the calm remains in the Morton family once this gets to the business end of the
I,
season into
I
finals.
hope so, mate. That my uncle's second, I'm first. He wants to kick me out of the comp because I'm a professional,
Yeah,
because
right.
and I'm just saying, mate, it's all banter. We've been doing this since I was 17, 18. And suddenly he won the first few years of it. Now that he's losing, he's not so happy about it.
Competitive juices flowing. Speaking of competitive juices flowing, we did touch on it earlier, but a quick point on Ardie Savea being crowned the inaugural Super Rugby Pacific Player of the Year. He absolutely deserves it. You can see what he's done to that team, but also, as you say, the shackles are off and he can truly play. And I think my favorite part about this is the fact that he's proved the haters wrong. He's gone in and done a tremendous job, and it just means that we are getting a great feel-good news story out of the uprising of Moana, but also that he well and truly is not going anywhere as far as Test rugby goes because Super Rugby is a really good competition and he deserves to be that player because he is setting the standard. As good as Langy Gleeson in Australia has been, Tom Hooper, Carlo Tizzano, Duplessis Karifi across the ditch, Ardie Savea hands down deserves that title.
For him to win the award with 2 rounds to go, that's a bit of a statement, right? But I don't think anyone would disagree with it. From the jump, from round one when he debuted for Moana against the Western Force in Perth, he was the man. He stood up against the Reds in round two, scored a try. He scored the greatest try that never was against the Fijian Drua at North Harbour Stadium, and scored a beauty against the Highlanders in Dunedin as well. He's been brilliant throughout the whole season. He's almost played more like a midfielder at times, or at least shown that skill set, and it's exciting. I think the question that remains, though, is not so much whether or not he is the best player in the competition, because again, it's officially official.
He
He
is,
is.
yeah.
Question that needs to be asked, though, and Scott Robertson, the All Blacks coach, I know you're watching. Big fan of the show, I'm sure. Um, do you move Ardie to open side flanker? Ardie's
Mm,
played a lot of eight for the All Blacks in years
100%.
gone by, but he's been putting up numbers with freedom with Moana by wearing that number seven jersey. Maybe it's time to do that. Put Wallace Atiti at eight, maybe, or maybe keep him at six and put someone else at number eight. Hoskins Tutu, maybe, but I doubt that.
That's huge. I think that's a really good point though, because even though we've got Duplessis Karifi part of the conversation, everyone's been hyping him up to be number seven. I think you do have to look at the balance of the back row, and maybe it's more so that Scott Razor Robinson needs to give Ardie that license and not make him play as structured because we don't want the chip and chases and the grubbers to go through for that to stop. We want that to continue in Test rugby. I want to see it done. You see some kicks be outrageously put through from the likes of Money Labok and Sasha Feinberg and Gumazulu and stuff like that. We want Ardie to keep doing it, but I guess it all comes down to balance and what Scott Razor Robinson is prepared to do and what he isn't prepared to do.
The biggest issue or the biggest problem that Razor could do here or create is by confusing Ardie or by refining him and not letting him use his skill sets. I mean, if you look at All Blacks teams of years gone by, Richie Mo'unga was consistently the best player in Super Rugby, or one of them. He goes into the All Blacks environment, he was a shadow of his Crusaders self, you know. Whether that comes back to coaching or just the pressure of the environment, I don't know. But what I do just want to say is Ardie, confidence. We love to see him smiling, seeing him happy. And when he's expressing himself on the rugby field with these chip and chases and grubber kicks and spin moves and torpedo punts, like this is all great.
Yeah.
Can you do that in a tense game against the Springboks at Ellis Park? Maybe not.
You and
Maybe
I
this time.
can't. Ardie Savea can.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, yeah. Probably no better time to do this than now, Fergo, but I'm retiring from the All Blacks, so I'm giving up on that dream and I'm okay with that. So Dad, if you're watching, it's going to break your heart. But I'm at peace with that. It's Ardie's
Because he's
jersey.
coming to play for the Wallabies and the Lions. That's why.
Yeah, give me a ring, Joe Schmidt. We'll see.
Um,
Happen.
Speaking of Joe Schmidt, he's been traveling all over the Pacific. He was in New Zealand Sunday at night, talking on the breakdown. That's Sky Sports news program, and then he was also in Sydney for the Waratahs Crusaders game, and then he was also down in Brumby land to watch the Brumbies play the Reds. Sorry. But and he would have seen that injury to Alan Alatoa, and I know that you've gone through the extent of the injury, but how badly does that? On just a quick wrap up on this, how badly does an injury to Alan Alatoa place our tight head prop stocks? Like, who are there? There's Taniela Tupou, which is finally starting to hit some form, and then there's Ben Robinson and Zane Nongo are the only capped tight head props that I can think of coming off the bat. You've got someone like Aiden Ross in the Chiefs who will be Wallabies eligible, but he's not a tight head prop. I believe he plays loose head. But yeah, like where do you like how big is that blow for Australia if this turns out to be? Because I do believe it's the leg that he ruptured his Achilles on. So we've got to be aware of the context of this injury. How bad does this impact a Wallaby side if indeed we were just speculating if indeed it is a more serious long-term injury?
Yeah, again, I really don't think it is a long-term injury, but if Allen were to go down and were to miss test matches or whatever, the Wallabies would be in strife.
Mm,
Um, Taniela Tupou, you mentioned the Tongan Thor. He's been improving over the last couple of weeks with the Waratahs, but they're very brief cameos. I mean, he played a whole second half, didn't he? I think against the Crusaders practically. So credit where it's due. But he played basically 10 minutes the week before, having
mm,
been shown a yellow card. And I'm still not convinced that he'd be quite the player you want to call upon to start a test
mm,
when you're coming up against the likes of Andrew Porter, Tag Furlong, when
mm,
they're fully fit and firing and not at all fatigued. If Allen is out, it's a real concern for the Wallabies. It's the same if Angus Bell goes down.
mm,
There's just a massive gap between those players and the next players in the depth chart.
mm.
It's a real concern, probably more so than in a lot of other positions in
Yeah,
Australian rugby.
I
If you look
agree.
at the outside backs,
Mm,
you know, if someone does go down, unfortunately, there are players who can step up. Lockie Anderson, I was very impressed with him last weekend.
yeah.
There are players that can step up in other positions, even first five, even at fly half. There are players who can step up, although they're untested. Loose head and tight head, real concern if the
Mm.
frontline Wallabies go down.
Yeah, no. It's a position to watch, and I think, as you say, what you don't get from an Angus Bell and a firing Alan Alatoa are genuinely good ball running threats, and that's something the Wallabies will need against the Lions because they themselves are bringing a plethora of ball running options in their pack. It's a mobile pack, it's a strong pack, and we're going to need them to be able to watch multiple defenders, not just watching one or two in the pack.
Leadership as well, really important,
Absolutely,
really important.
absolutely.
I mean, we still don't know if Harry Wilson is going to be the captain of the Wallabies this year. It could be someone else. Could be
Mm,
Allen again. I think there's every chance of that. If Joe does opt for another line-out option in the Wallabies' back row, obviously Harry can jump, but not maybe to the standard or not to the level to compete against the some of the Lions. But
mm,
if Harry Wilson's not there, the next Wallabies captain would be Allen. So
mm.
you need him there.
Yeah. Quick chat on the Wallaroos' great win over the USA. I thought that they were really gutsy, but overall, I think that they had the game plan set and they were playing it really, really well. And they managed to wrap up the threats of the USA team, and their forward pack wasn't necessarily dominated as we do see when they start going up against some of these tougher sides. I was very, very impressed. And Ash Masters, again for a second week, I've got to say perhaps probably the player of the most MVP, the MVP of the Wallaroos game. What do you reckon?
Ash Masters is very good. Eva Kapani, I think she's got 2-2 as well. Coming up against Hope Rogers from the USA, who's a loose head prop who scored five tries in 2 games against the Wallaroos now. So that's a stat in itself. But standout player for me was actually Charlotte Caslick. I'm a big
Mm.
fan of the Sevens program. If anyone reads anything that I do on Rugby Pass, you'll know that. It's but Caslick has switched over to 15s. She committed to the Reds and Super Rugby Women's, and she's reaping the rewards. Started on the wing last week, which was a bit of a surprise to everyone, and was kept pretty quiet. I don't think she touched the ball really for about half an hour.
It was a tough
Instead,
game. The Black Ferns did well to keep her out of the game, and I think the Wallaroos were a bit scared to go out wide early. So I think, and for the Black Ferns, that's only a good thing. But when you give her the ball, you can see what she does.
yeah, again, like Caslick was just tasked with having to tackle Caitlin Vahakola, a bunch of times, but instead, I think it was about 2 minutes into the game in Canberra that Charlotte touched the ball. She got involved early, scored a try later on. I think at the 17th minute, linking up with Mac Leonard. Um, Very good player. You know, but I don't want to see her on the wing still. Even when like Maya Stewart, when she comes back from injury, by all accounts, she's going to be fit for the World Cup. You need to find a place for Charlotte in that 15, and I think
Mhm.
it's at 15
15,
that she
yeah.
plays at fullback. I think that's the most likely position for her. I mean, she could be an impact player off the bench, but why waste someone of so much experience,
Mm,
leadership, proven skill, world-class ability? Why waste them by having them only come on for 20 minutes? Unless it's against like a USA in pool play. Those two teams, they're going to meet in about 100 days at the World Cup, and which will basically be around a 16 type clash. Whoever wins that match will likely join England by going through to the quarterfinals.
mm.
Maybe you have Charlotte come off the bench then to close out the game, but that said, you've got to find a place in the starting team for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you could almost compare it to a Suoli'i in the sense that although Caslick has a far greater understanding of the game of union, 15s is very different to sevens, as we've seen a lot of players have trouble with, not trouble, but they've taken time rather to adapt to the 15 aside game from the sevens. And it's just about learning where you need to be. And fullback, which is what, where Joseph Kuso Suoli'i has been playing, it's a position where you need to know what you're doing all the time and need to know where you need to be. So
Yeah.
you'd want to see reps there from both Suoli'i and Caslick. You just want to see reps from them in that position, and if we get that, remains to be seen. So now, Finn, sorry, a question without notice. But it is getting towards Wallabies selection time. We know that it's only like a couple of weeks away with finals. I mean, when I say a couple, maybe a month away with whether it be around the final week or beforehand. It's going to become really quickly and really close. And now I want to ask, who are your top five overseas picks? Because overseas selection actually hasn't been a big part of the Wallabies conversation, which I think is great because we want the talent here and we want them to be playing well in Australia for Australian teams. But nonetheless, I want to ask you who are your top five overseas Wallabies selections, and keep in mind that guys like Pete Samu, Matt Phillip, James O'Connor aren't necessarily actually part of that conversation like I was with Noah Lolesio. So we'll keep those names to one side for a second. Who else are you picking to come in to the Wallabies squad environment?
I really don't think there'll be five. I'd be very surprised if there's five. I think Will Skelton at La Rochelle is a certainty. He should be. Obviously, the size, experience, that's X factor. And
For sure.
Samu Kerevi, probably. I think the Wallabies are lacking a little bit at their stocks in the midfield. At least that's my opinion. And I think having someone like that with his experience come in could be useful. I don't know how he's been going in Japan, to be
Mm,
fair. I'm just going off the fact that he was included in the squad for the spring tour last year. Marika Koroibete is another player who, in theory, could be in that conversation, but I just can't see it happening at all. He was very poor for the Wallabies last year. He had a few test matches, three or four, I want to say. He first got a run against the Springboks in Perth and really failed to fire before his last test was the Sydney Bledisloe Cup test, I believe, at a core. And I think he's much more likely to get his swan song, his fairy tale finish, playing for the AUNZ Invitational 15. Um, so I'm gonna say, and I would include James O'Connor in that conversation. He is
yep.
overseas based. I know he plays in Super Rugby Pacific,
Mm,
but he's based in Christchurch.
yep.
It is a different country. It's across the ditch there. So I would include him. And that said, if you want to include someone like Noel Lolesio in that conversation potentially, just considering the fact he is headed to Japan, you could.
Mm.
So for the sake of this, I will say he is, and I'll say Will Skelton, Samu Kerevi, James O'Connor, Noel Lolesio.
Yep. No, I think that's a pretty good list. Um, I think it's interesting that Richie Arnold or Rory Arnold haven't been discussed anywhere because I think the locking stocks have been so good, and I think that Will Skelton is the point of difference as you've mentioned, just from size and experience. So that's really reassuring and really good to hear. Sean McMahon, not really in and around that conversation because the back row battles are so fierce from the Australian-based players here, and will still have access to players like Langy Gleeson and Tom Hooper. They're not yet overseas as of yet. Pete Samu coming back, Matt Phillip. It'll be interesting to see how someone like Matt Phillip fits into this Wallabies group because he is coming back, and although Japan is a very different sort of environment to be able to play top, front five man rugby, nonetheless, he is an experienced player, and experience is something the Wallabies lack, especially without someone like James Slipper on the field, who makes up like a quarter of their test caps. So that margin swings significantly if he's not on the pitch.
I,
Um,
I, I can't see Matt Phillip making the Wallaby squad at all, to be honest. I'm a big fan of MP. What he did for the Melbourne Rebels a few years ago, his work rate, when I first started at Rugby Pass and I was doing like a lot of like top five Australian players pieces, he was a player I named every week. His work rate was unreal, but the depth in the second row at the minute is deep,
it's
really,
stellar,
really
hey.
strong. Like the Arnold brothers aren't in the conversation because it's so stacked.
Mm,
Will Skelton, Nick Frost, Jeremy Williams, Darcy Swain, Lucan Salakaia-Lotto, they're the first five players in the conversation. Then
100%.
maybe Matt Phillip, or alternatively the Arnold brothers.
Mm.
I forgot which one is more. I think it's Rory. I think he was more recently capped, but uh, yeah, I think those first five names I mentioned when it comes to the second row, much more likely to make the squad. I think for Matt Phillip, he's coming back to Australia, signing with the Tars. He'll get the chance to potentially debut for the Tars against the British and Irish
British and Irish
Lions.
Lions. Jesus.
And he's giving himself 2 years to effectively fight, perform well, and force his way back into the Wallabies in time for the Home World Cup in 2027. But I think thinking of him as a test candidate to face the Lions, that's a bit naive, or it's just not in the conversation really. Unfortunately, as good as he is.
Yep. No, that's a good take on it. And then finally, I think we just do have to remember that Laney Gleeson and Tom Hooper are heading overseas, but nonetheless, I do think they're very much part of the conversation because they have been playing great all season, actually. Consistency is something which I've been extremely impressed with a lot of the Wallabies players, most of them actually. Whereas I think in previous seasons, maybe their forms come and go. So yeah, so really, really impressed with some of that. Still some questions about certain positions in depth, but nonetheless, pretty decent run at it. Now we're just going to get straight into a quick stat attack. So I'm going to shout some stats at you, and then if something hits you with a passion and you want to mention something, go ahead. We'll just speed through these. I think the first thing that I'd like to touch on is the Waratahs, and you look at the amount of points that they're scoring and the amount of tries that they're scoring. They're sitting at 10th and ninth in the competition out of 11 respectively. So their points differential, if you go to that, and that's where I think this stat really comes to life, is that the points differential at the moment is minus 99. So they're the second worst Australian side apart from the Western Force, who are 109. So 10 points difference. But the Western Force are defending a lot worse, but they're scoring more tries. But then the Waratahs are defending better, but they're just not scoring any points. And I think that this just speaks to their clunky and basic one-dimensional attack, which just really hasn't been able to put sides under any pressure without someone like Joseph Akuso Suaalii. So
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. The Tars before the Crusaders game had been much better defensively, certainly at home. A lot more thrillers and dramatic matches. Their away record probably is more of a reflection of that points differential. I'd love to know their points differential at home.
mm,
Um, because I would say it's considerably better those first five games at home, or four games at home, whatever it was, five games, I think, considerably better than the Crusaders game on its own. You
yeah.
know, um, I think the first few games of the season they were decided by 3 points or less.
Mm.
Those first few games at home, that is, against the Drua Highlanders and Western Force, very close games, and yeah, I think the Tars. I do think where they sit at the ladder at the minute is a probably a fair representation of where they deserve to be. Maybe a couple places higher, um, but they'll have a chance to prove that, I guess, in the coming weeks. But I'm not surprised about those stats.
Yeah, no, it's the amount of caliber, the caliber of player that they have. They should be able to score some more tries, and that's pretty much how they have been scoring their tries actually, just by the sheer class of certain of the players that they've had. So it's kept them in the game, but just not been enough. I think just moving on to the force, then you look at something like the I wrote about it in my rugby pass piece this week, which I'll link in the link below, in the description below rather, is their defense has been good, but no one can sustain tackling, several hundred tackles each week along with the travel out factor that you already mentioned. So, for instance, they've made the second most tackles in the competition at an average of 202 per game. Now that was before this weekend, but that gives you an idea of where they're at. And then vice versa, they're sitting 11th for missed tackles. So they're the worst in the competition for missed tackles. But then their tackle percentage is ninth at 86.4%. So I just think that you look at the force and they're scoring points, but they just don't seem to have enough of a breakdown presence because turnovers one, they're eighth in the competition. They're just not able to slow down ball when opposition have them, and they're also getting pinged a lot. So they have the worst penalty count, and that just speaks to it. If you're under, it's like a secular, it's a bad cycle. You got average defense, you have to scramble, you're making penalties, you get marched down, and then you can see territory and possession stats. And I just think that that comes down to the quality of the overall squad of the force. It's a lot better. It's just not quite where it needs to be.
It's quite fascinating that actually, because this whole season everyone's been harping on about Carlo Tizzano, who, to be fair, one of the top tacklers, if not the top tackler in the competition at the moment, top try scorer as well. Should he be playing at open side flanker ahead of Fraser McWright for the Wallabies? Fascinating. All these conversations. Nick Champion de Crepney, also very good at blindside flanker, but the lack of turnovers there,
Mm.
maybe has to be a reflection of the back row to an extent. That's their bread and butter.
Yeah, I mean, let me back you up here with some stats. Carlo Tizzano is not in the top 10 pilferers of the competition. Fraser McWright, he is sitting at number, where is he? He's sitting at number four with 12 turnovers total for the competition. Do you want to know who leads that? Timothy Tavatavanawai on
Mm.
20. He's got nine more turnovers than our premier open side flanker. That's insanity. And then the Australian who's leading it is Luke Reimer on 14. So that really is his skill set. So sorry, Fraser McWright has 12, so he's eight behind Tavatavanawai. But nonetheless,
That's interesting with Reimer, actually, because he's not playing
anywhere
as
near as
consistently
many
as the
minutes.
others.
Yeah.
No,
So yeah, Luke Reimer is the second for amount of turnovers per 80. So he's really nailing that stat. Fraser McWright is way further down, almost an entire minute, one less per 80 minutes. So 1.4 compared to 2.3 for Luke Reimer. So that is an aspect of the Wallabies game that they're going to have to get right if they really want to be able to ice out a Lions game because they have got a mobile pack that is going to send it at the breakdown. Um,
absolutely.
the final stat that I will chuck at you, the Brumbies scoring the second most amount of tries, which stands to reason because they are top of the table at the moment, and they're scoring third amount of points. And that's really impressive from a side that often gets labeled perhaps boring or maybe too structured. I think that they, as we touched on earlier, they have a great variation of how they attack, whether it's in tight and narrow with the likes of Alan Alatoa scoring those tries, or whether they're finding at the speedster Corey Toole out on the wings.
They're winning games, Fergo. That's all that matters. I think it doesn't matter how they do it, or you can look at stats and whatnot, but the main stat is the fact that they are still winning games. So people can call them boring and whatever, um, but they're winning games. They're top of the table at the moment, and so they can be as boring as they like. They're backing it up.
Yeah, well, I mean, exactly. I don't think Stephen Larkham's getting losing any sleep over the fact that he's not getting not getting those stats in the highest percentile.
Mm.
And then just on the Reds, their line out success continues to struggle. They're the second worst team, which is concerning considering how many Wallabies they have in in those areas that are contributing to that a stat like that. And then I'd also just like to touch on the fact that they're just not goal kicking. They're kicking at 82%. They're the best in the competition for their goal kicking stats, but they're just not taking any of those kicks. So whether it's the lack of kicks that they're taking or, because they're opting against, it's one of those things that if you're kicking at 82%, whereas the Brumbies are kicking at 66%, which is indicative of where Tom Liner and Noel Olaseo are in their respective kicking stats, you just
Mm.
kind of say, well, when it comes to finals, are the Reds going to explode and just win every game because they start taking the three, and then every team's going to be like, well, what the hell? Like, where was this earlier in the season? Or is it just like, it means nothing because you're not taking the kicks?
Yeah, it's a weird game of chance or risk from the Reds, what they've done all season by or practically always opting to go for the corner or chase 7 points as opposed to three. But in finals footy, or even this game coming up against the Hurricanes, take the three. You got to win. That's the most important things. Again, it doesn't have to be pretty. Be boring like the Brumbies, if that's what it takes. Take more shots at goal, because that's what it's going to take to win these games. And yeah, very surprising, especially with the success they have had off the tee. Would you say 82%? That's sharp. That's pretty
Mhm.
good. Um, Use that. That's a strength
Yep.
potentially.
No, I agree. And unlike the lineup, which they've gone to several times, it's operating at one of the worst percentages. So you got to know how to
Mm.
play. But I think what you just said, coming up to the Hurricanes game, that's where we're going to go right now. We're going to go straight into the Super Rugby round preview to wrap it up. So the weekend starts off with the Crusaders hosting the Highlanders. I think this can only go one way. Quick comment from you on this. I reckon the Crusaders with a bonus point, which is going to make the round 16 game for them, which we'll touch on in a sec, crucial. What do you reckon?
I hope so. And I think it will. I think they're strong favourites, especially at home. After what happened the other week against the Chiefs, they'll want to bounce back. And again, it sets up a pretty entertaining final round if it does go that way. So, as a rugby fan, as a rugby nut, I'm gonna hope for the best. And so, yeah, Crusaders with winning bonus point.
People in Dunedin, prepare for the worst. Then the next game, I think this is the game of the round, actually. Reds versus Hurricanes at Suncorp. You might be heading up there for that game. It's going to be an absolute cracker. I think that for this game, the Reds have built. They showed more in the Brumbies game than they did in the Waratahs game, and they're slowly pulling themselves out of this. I think a bit of a rut that they had there for a couple of a big losing streak, and then
Mm.
hopefully they get some more players back because, like on their injury list reporting on rugby.com.au, they don't actually give time frames of any injuries, unlike other clubs do. But I'm hoping that if they get some of their key players back, they have a serious chance of being able to lock this game up. And I'm actually going to say the Reds at home at Suncorp.
I disagree. I think the Hurricanes.
Really, from you?
Yeah, well, I've got no allegiance to any team, so there's no bias here. But I do think the Hurricanes. There's just something about them. I think genuinely, I think they could be a top three team, and or a top four team. Sorry, can't make the top three now. Top three is locked in. By
Mm.
the way, those
Yep.
those three teams. It just matters. We're going to see which order. The Hurricanes. I think if they can beat the Reds, they would have beaten the Reds in Brisbane and the Brumbies in Canberra. Like going to the finals, like that's those are some confidence results you can look back to and go, damn, like we can do this. And what's especially interesting or what's at stake here for this game. So again, I will be there. I'm keen to go back home and go back to Brizzy. I haven't been there in close to a year, but whoever comes fourth could be valuable. There's a super loser, or what's the term? That's the highest ranked loser in the qualifying round, the quarterfinals, progresses through to the semifinals, gets a second chance.
Mm.
So if you come fourth and the top three teams, it all goes to script and the top three teams win their games, the fourth team will still go through despite losing.
Yep.
That's what's at stake here. Who's
Great
going to be
point.
that fourth team? Who's going to get them in? Who's going to get themselves in with the chance to sneak to have a second chance? Barring, I mean, the Blues, if they make the top six, could beat the Chiefs and Hamilton. I could see that happening. But if you're a Reds or a Canes fan, it's dare to dream and hope for the best. And by hoping for the best, you're hoping your team wins this weekend or on Friday night at Suncorp. So should be a cracker. Game of the round.
Yeah, no, game of the round. I'm glad you mentioned the Blues because they're '09 rivals, and now I guess they're the better half of the '09. Moana are
Mm.
going up against the Chiefs, and I'm going to whip up a graphic here that I've seen been going around that the Grim Reaper has been knocking on the door of several Super Rugby teams, and the Chiefs are potentially next for the Moana Grim Reaper. And that, although I don't think it'll serve up the game of the round like the Reds and the Hurricanes will, I do think it'll be a very good game. There's a lot on the line for Moana. Blues are on a bye this week. They host the Waratahs in the final round in round 16, so they're not going to be there. Moana has an opportunity to solidify their position in sixth, but I do think that the Chiefs are this side that are going to be taking teams to town. So business end of the season, Chiefs up this one. I reckon even with a bonus point, which could make them clear first.
Yeah, I don't like being Mr. Negative or being the pessimist. But as much as I've loved Moana Pacifica's journey this season, I think their playoff hopes effectively come to an end this weekend. I mean, they won't be out of the mix, but I think they're going to take a big hit. The Chiefs winning bonus point, they'll go a big. The Chiefs themselves will take a big step towards securing top spot by the end of the round robin. We'll leapfrog the Brumbies if they do get a winning bonus point. That's how I see it playing out. There's too much at stake here for both teams, but I think the Chiefs with their star power, they'll uh, they'll do the job.
Can you imagine if Moana won, how much that would throw the entire loop out? Like
Oh
Brumbies on a bye
man,
this week, they would stay on top of the Chiefs, and then it would come down to that. It would be nuts. Like it's not beyond the realm of possibility, but it's nuts.
yeah, it would be one of the stories of the season, wouldn't it? Probably the story of the season.
Yeah.
Despite what we saw at North Harbour Stadium on Saturday
Mm.
with Moana getting up over the Blues, how big that was. But for them to beat the Chiefs, the high-flying Chiefs in Hamilton, man,
Beat the Crusaders earlier
like,
this year as well. It's a hell of a
yeah,
season.
like you have to start looking at, I don't know, do you build Ardie a statue? Do you build Tana one as well?
Well, we already
Miracle
have
for
two on a commission, so we'll get a third
Yeah,
one. I don't know
it's
where we're
true
going to put it.
actually.
Yeah.
It's true. He's that good. He deserves one for each man of the match performance, and he's had a fair few this season. So yeah. Look, I think I'd love to see it, but I just can't.
No,
And maybe
but neither can I.
that's me
Neither
being
can I.
pessimistic. And I hope in one week, this time next week when we're doing the pod, I can have a reawakening or a rebirth of sorts and go, hey, I was too negative before. It's time to be positive, and heck, I might buy a Moana jersey. Who
Oh,
knows?
mate.
It's
Mate, some of their
let's
training
see.
gear. Shout out to the people who are designing the training gear because they have some good quality shit and it looks great.
Mm.
On those lads, I don't know if the shirt looks the same on me as it does on Ardie Savea, but you can only find out one way. We go to the final game of the week, and only four games with a couple of teams having three teams having bye. I think this game has the potential to be a really entertaining game, but I don't necessarily think that it has any bearing on anything necessarily. Only the Waratahs can make the finals if they get two bonus point wins against the Blues round 16 and against the Force this weekend. They can actually make themselves a push into it. But the Western Force, unfortunately, I think mathematically are technically out of the race. So I think that the Force will be disappointed. It'll be depending on who their stocks are. As we say, we record this on a Monday. We don't know what the teams are going to be.
Mm.
Waratahs are probably going to want to salvage some pride. But you know what? I don't really think they deserve to be in the top six. I don't really want to see them there. I prefer them to go away and work on themselves for the Lions. I don't need any more injuries for some of their star Wallaby players. So I'm going to say that Dan McKellar, sorry, mate, but I do think that the Western Force take this one with Simon Cron wanting to go out big with a big bang for the final game for the Sea of Blue.
Yeah, I can only hope that Simon Cron rested the players last week in a bid to bring them back for this game against the Tars. If they can be full strength playing at home, um, then I think they will beat the Tars and knock the Waratahs out of playoff contention. That said, if the men from NSW can get up, then it does set up an unreal fixture in round 16 between the Tars and the Blues
Mm.
at Auckland's Eden Park. Basically, a winner takes all. Should Moana go down to the Chiefs, a winner takes all for who moves into the playoff spot, which would be awesome. And if we can also have the Crusaders taking on the Brumbies in Canberra to decide a top two spot or potentially who finishes top of the table, like high stakes in
High stakes,
final
Jeopardy.
game of the regular season, final round of the regular season. That's what this competition's needed for such a long time.
Mm.
And the reduction of the finals teams from 8 to 6 has been huge. It's been great because we're having these conversations. Whereas if it was 8 teams like last year, we'd be talking about, well, should the Waratahs rest players this week because, they're
They
still going
can
to make
make
the
it. Yeah.
quarters, like high stakes. There's a lot on the line. And while I do think the Force will get up, I'd love to see the Tars do it.
Mm. No, I agree. Fingers crossed for a good game. Stellar weekend of rugby that's just been awesome. Round of rugby that's coming up. Stay tuned for more content on here and on our TikTok. I'll fucking link all those here and around it in the description. And then also just another stellar pod with you, Finn. So thank you very much for coming along. It's been a good weekend in the land of rugby and in the world of rugby. So stay tuned, guys. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share us to all those people that love rugby, and we'll keep bringing you guys good rugby content. So thank you very much, and ciao for another week.